Is your airbrush looking a little scary? Stick around, I'll teach you a couple of things on deep cleaning your airbrush and a couple of tricks to keep those deep cleanings a little farther apart from each other. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I am Impendingduff. If this is actually your first time here to the channel, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and ding the bell. It'll help me out big time in growing this channel, and it'll give you a notification to let you know when I release my next tutorial or video. So today's topic is going to be on deep cleaning your airbrush. Now, this is something that I don't recommend doing every single time you use your airbrush, but I'm also going to give you a tip on how to maintain your airbrush so that you don't need to deep clean it so often. It'll also help you do a quick switch between colors. One of the most common complaints I hear from people who have never airbrushed is it's a pain in the ass to swap colors. I think that's silly, and you just don't know what you're talking about yet because you don't own an airbrush. I'm going to show you a little trick on how you can swap paint real quick, and it'll give you a little bit more confidence and hopefully encourage you to get into a tool that I think is really, really special for our hobby. So let's get into the quick tips here. I'm going to show you a couple of different things. It's going to be a little fast-paced, so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below in the comments section. I'll do my best to answer them for you. Otherwise, you can catch me on my live stream on Twitch 3 nights a week. Feel free to ask any questions you want. All right, gang, let's get into this.
All right, so I was working on a little Primaris workup last night with one of my students, and I figured this would be a great opportunity to show you guys how to clean out your airbrush and even swap out colors really quick. So the key is you got to get yourself the hobo sink, as my boy Kenny would call it, just a solo cup, whatever. Keep it at your workstation. And you've got all this residual paint still in your cup here. I like these little wash bottles. They're like tattoo wash bottles. I don't know what they're technically called, but it's just filled with straight water. And all I'm going to do here is rinse it out. I'm not putting anything through the brush, no cleaners, no fancy anything. Now, I've got some clean water in there, and I'm going to pinch off the front of the airbrush. If you have a cone, you can just press your finger against it. Something like this Sotar that has no needle protection prongs. I just grab like an old glove or something, ball it up, and kind of cram it on there and make like a slight pinching motion. And that'll help with getting your brush to backflow. I know a lot of people struggle with backflow. Just mess around with closing off that needle the best you can and then blowing some air back into the brush. Backflow is when you're causing air to backflow into the cup. That'll cause all that residual paint in the needle canal to basically come out.
I like to make sure that I get the nozzle of the wash bottle down into the cup and down into the needle canal. If you can do that on your brush, just kind of blast a little bit of water into that canal to just help rinse out a bunch of the particles and whatnot in there, and then do the backflow.
So I do that 2 or 3 times. Rinse, repeat, essentially backflow for a second time. And you can see the paint, or the water, I should say, is much cleaner. So I'm going to go back in here, I'm going to rinse it out again, put a little more in there, and for the 3rd time, it should be fine, but if you have some darker pigmented paints, some more aggressive paints, maybe a 4th time. And then just blow out the residual water. This was actually a trick shown to me by Vince Venturella. It's clean, you can see it's perfectly clean. I didn't scrub it, I didn't put any alcohol in there, nothing. But how are we going to deal with some of that caked on paint after like a week or so? Obviously, I'm going to use a little bit of isopropyl. I'm going to clean the very tip of the brush after every day that I use it. I might even do this between colors sometimes, depending on what you're using. If you're using a white or something that's really kind of notorious for clogging, I'll do this every hour or so. But as you can see, this cup is essentially clean. If I wanted to, I could use that toothbrush to clean out that ring of blue, but I'm going to use this G-Vision's ultrasonic cleaner. Now, there is some controversy behind whether or not to use ultrasonic cleaners.
A lot of people don't realize that the baskets provided with the ultrasonic cleaner actually dampen the vibration. I don't know the technical term for it, but using anything in a basket will actually reduce the reverberation. Possibly that's what it is. So without using the basket, you're getting 100% of the cleaning effectiveness of the ultrasonic cleaner. That's why I don't use the basket.
I think ultrasonic cleaners are a good thing for a deep clean. They have a lot of different settings. You can see it's a lot of fun the way it kind of vibrates things clean for you. Mine has multiple settings. I think that's important. It goes all the way up to 10 minutes here. Mine also has a little bit of a heating nature to it, but don't worry about that. So let's disassemble our brush here. I'm going to make sure that I have a bin for parts, and I sped up the video here. Just the main thing is that we're putting all of the parts that come in contact with paint into the ultrasonic cleaner. So like this needle tube here, the trigger flappy, whatever the heck it's called, and most importantly, the air valve do not go in the ultrasonic cleaner ever. Get yourself a container, a Tupperware, whatever, and put it to the side. Put all those parts to the side. Now I'm going to take off the needle protector cone and the regulator here, or it's also known as the needle cone retention screw or something like that. But I put it all into the ultrasonic cleaner, including the body of the brush. And this is not going to harm the brush, but I don't recommend doing it every single day. It's just not good for the chrome plating. I'm going to top off my isopropyl. I use 91%. The higher the better, but you got to be careful once you get up into the 100% stuff. So real quick, I wanted to show it in the actual bath here. I run it for about 10 minutes. It's not going to dissolve all of the paint magically. What it's going to do is dislodge it. And you'll see some of the paint does get removed, but then we have to go through and wipe it down with a paper towel or something. I didn't go through and do that. I'm just going to kind of fast forward here to this part where I'm checking to make sure that my needle is nice and clean here. If I run it through a paper towel and there's nothing on it, obviously it's clean. So we'll set that aside. We'll get ready with the body here. It's all nice and clean. I like to use these dental picks. They're great for getting into those little nooks and crannies of your teeth. They're not super abrasive. They're somewhat gentle and flexible. And that's great for an airbrush because you don't want to gouge the brass in your airbrush. But if you're worried about it, you can also get these types. They're like a rubberized one with these little fingers on them, and they work just great. I'm happy with the brush, so I'm going to speed it up here. You guys don't need to see how it's cleaned. Just kind of run it back and forth. Just be careful that the metal of the brush doesn't gouge into the brass of your airbrush. And here I'm just going to show you can also do it with the rubberized one. They work almost the same. I just like the brush one better, to be honest with you guys. I'm also going to clean the retainer. This is also known as the regulator to some people. It's got these 6 little air holes in mine. Depending on the airbrush that you're using, it's going to be different, but most of them have 2, 3 holes. Make sure those are nice and clean. Then I come in with a toothbrush and some isopropyl just to clean off that protective crown. Just, make sure it's nice and clean. And then the dreaded needle cone, if you will. In the chrome, they're tiny. So I use this little prison shank tool. I don't exactly know what it's called, but it's got a nice little flat edge to it, as well as being super pointy. It can stab you, I know from experience. Be careful. But I like to use that flat edge to kind of dig in there. But be careful with this little needle cone here. If you push this tool too far in, you're going to blow out that thin brass. So be gentle with it. Now, I like these dental picks because they also fit in this super tiny little needle cone. And you can see some of the paint coming off there. You may think it's clean, but you stick one of these little pipettes in there and you find all kinds of stuff. People constantly say, "Oh, I just cleaned my airbrush. Oh, I just cleaned my airbrush, but I'm getting a weird spray pattern. It's clogged." Well, you have no idea the tiniest little fleck of paint that can just absolutely bugger up your airbrush. So make sure it's clean. Now we'll get ready for some reassembly. I use some Vaseline petroleum jelly.
Not for that. Get your heads out of the gutter.
You could use anything, really. You can use chapstick, plain chapstick. I also showed some needle juice from Badger. And then we're going to go ahead and assemble here, and I'll explain what those things are used for a little later. So first and foremost, I'm going to screw in my air valve, okay? And then, of course, the male attachment for the quick disconnect. So I put in that air valve, I put in the little trigger flap here, and then I put in the high roller trigger. The reason I do that is if I were to put the needle tube in first and then put in my air valve, the notch on the front of that needle tube there could catch onto the post of the air valve, and then it gets stuck and you bend your air valve. I don't know how that happens because I definitely never did that before, but trust me. And as I screw in the needle tube here, I'm also pulling back on the retention nut on the back there just to keep tension. It tends to kind of get stuck, so just to keep it aligned. Now we're going to put the needle cone in its place, but I want to show you the trick with the petroleum jelly. Sometimes you get an air leak right here, depending on what manufacturer you use. So the petroleum jelly or the plain chapstick or beeswax, whatever you choose to use, this was like $1 at Meijer for the travel size, so it's going to last me a lifetime. I just take a little on a skewer and put a very, very tiny dab on the threads of the retainer ring. I call it the regulator. It's the regulator. Put your needle cone back in place and then screw in your regulator. I guess I'm just going to call it a regulator from now on, okay? But having that petroleum jelly or whatever you decide to use on those threads kind of acts like Teflon tape. It stops it from leaking air, essentially. And it's a nice little extra. So then I put on the needle protection cone, the needle protection tip. And now we're going to talk about the needle. So about the front quarter of the needle is all that comes in contact with paint. I'm going to use some Reg Dab.
So essentially, think of Reg Dab on the needle like a cast iron skillet, and you're seasoning it. You kind of work in that oil into the pores of the metal of the needle, and it just kind of gives it like that little bit of Teflon coating to protect it from any type of tip dry or adverse effects of using an airbrush and paint going through the nozzle. This is something that's going to prolong tip dry, but it's not going to prevent it completely. It's just going to make your life a lot easier.
You can use Hops No. 9 gun oil. Reg Dab's cheap at conventions. You can get it for like $2. I've had this bottle for 1.5 years and it's hardly used because you can see how little I put on there. I literally put just a tiny dab on there. It's literally Reg Dab because you use just a dab. And what this is doing is acting like a Teflon coat or even like a nonstick spray, if you will. But I'm going to put it in the crook of my hand here. I'm not going to leave that drip of oil on there. I'm just going to kind of rub it in, and I'm not going to have it like uberly saturated here. That's the point, okay? Now, we'll go ahead and open up the retainer nut on the back there and insert it into the airbrush. I push down on the trigger because there's a little groove in there, kind of like think of threading a needle. And then I slowly pass it through, get it through the needle bearing there. It should give you a little resistance, but not be difficult. But be careful putting the needle in too. Just like the prison shank, you don't want to blow out the tip of that needle cone. Once it's all set, you put your handle back on, and you should be off to the races. Everything should move nice and crisp and easily. There it is, guys. Start to finish.
All right, gang. That's all I got for you this time. I really hope that these tips are going to help you out, kind of take the headache out of using your airbrush. I know a lot of people struggle with the whole airbrush clogging, paint drying thing. So showing you this deep dive, this deep clean, if you will. I think that'll really help you guys kind of appreciate the tool more and maybe break out of that chamber of thinking it's only a tool for base coating or priming. By making sure that you're cleaning the brush constantly as opposed to just leaving it aside full of paint for an extended amount of time. The second you're done with that brush, rinse it out the way I showed you in the video, and you should have a really good, easy time with the brush from here on out. And then maybe you don't break it down so often to do the deep clean. Using this method, I actually only break down my brush about once a month, and some people even think that's a little too much, but by keeping up with your maintenance, you're going to have a lot easier time working with the brush, and maybe it's going to give you a little more confidence to try some new techniques down the line. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I know the video was kind of fast, but I'm trying to shorten my videos a little bit. So leave a comment down below. I'll answer whatever questions you have. And if you want, you can visit me on my Twitch stream 3 nights a week and ask questions in real time, get real time feedback. I'm always available to help you guys out if that's what you need. If you'd like to support me, there are many ways you can do so by coming over to the Twitch stream and checking it out, or you can check out my Patreon campaign. This is what I make my full-time living in, so by checking out the Patreon campaign and potentially becoming a patron of mine, you get yourself a weekly tutorial exclusive to Patreon. Or if you're interested in one-on-one painting lessons, we do those via there. Also, a monthly loot crate full of hobby goodies right to your door. There are many tiers to show some love and support. So check it out if you're interested in supporting me, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.